It was a grey autumn afternoon when I stepped through the heavy oak doors of St. Mary's Memorial Chapel. The air inside was cool, the hush nearly reverent. Faint echoes of hushed prayers drifted from the main altar, and the scent of burning incense clung to every wooden pew. I'd arrived straight from the hospital. My sister Elena lay unconscious in the intensive care unit after the crash of Flight 927. Only hours earlier, the priest had approached our family with gentle eyes and a solemn voice. "It's time to let her go." My heart thundered in my chest as I sank into the last row, my hands trembling around the strap of my camera bag. I could still hear the crash report on the evening news. Turbulence, a sudden drop, fragments scattering across the cornfields of Iowa. Only 3 survivors were pulled from the wreckage. My sister was not one of them, the doctor said. Yet here I was, waiting for some miracle, some sign that he had been wrong. A soft glow from the stained glass windows painted the chapel floor in aureate hues. I could almost believe I was inside a painting, an ethereal pause between life and death. Father Miguel, a slight man in his 60s with silver hair and gentle posture, emerged from behind the altar. He held a leather-bound book and moved slowly, as though each step weighed 100 pounds. He paused at the front row, his eyes meeting mine. "Your sister," he said, voice low and compassionate, "has begun her final journey. There is peace waiting for her. I'm sorry." I forced my jaw to unclench, refusing to let his words take root. "Peace," I whispered, but the word tasted like ash. I closed my eyes, inhaling the smells of age-old wood and candle wax, willing myself to believe he was mistaken. That's when I remembered the backpack. Elena always carried her camera wherever she went, a vintage Nikon painted in pastel green, her constant companion on every trip. The backpack had survived the crash, retrieved almost intact by rescuers among the scattered debris. When I saw it arrive at the hospital with the wreckage, my breath caught. The zipper was half open, the straps singed at the edges. After Father Miguel finished his blessing and left the chapel, I retrieved the backpack from where I'd laid it beside the pew. The fabric was torn in places, threads frayed like the tendrils of my own unraveling hope. I knelt and unzipped the main compartment. Among her notebooks, travel maps, and Polaroids from our childhood, a single photograph lay face down on the black nylon lining, its edges crisp and the image surface glossy, as though it had been taken only moments ago. My pulse spiked. I flipped it over. There she was, Elena, alive and smiling, standing in front of the jet bridge at O'Hare Airport, her favorite spot. She was wearing the blue flight attendant uniform she'd taken on just last month. The sky behind her was clear, late afternoon sun glinting off the terminal windows. In her hand, she held the exact same pastel green Nikon. Her hair fell in perfect waves, untouched by soot or fear. A new photo, taken after the crash. How could it be? My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the picture. A single date was printed in white at the bottom, October 14th, 2025. Today was October 12th. I stumbled out of the chapel, clutching the photo like a lifeline. Outside, the wind whipped through the parking lot, rattling the skeletal branches of the nearby oak. My breath billowed in front of me as I ran back toward the hospital's entrance, the photo crumpled in my fist. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The corridor to ICU stretched ahead, an expanse of white tile and metal doors. I paused at Nurse Jensen's station. She looked up from her chart. "Is everything all right?" I found this in her backpack," I said, pressing the photo toward her. Her eyebrows shot upward. "What am I looking at? A picture from tomorrow." Before she could answer, I realized how insane I sounded. Tomorrow, time, death. I swallowed, steeling myself. "Please," I said, voice raw, "I need to see her." She nodded slowly. "I'll get the doctor." My heart roared as I waited, every second stretching into an eternity. The photo burned a hole in my palm, its mystery pulsing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. But one thing was clear: I could not let Father Miguel's words be the end of the story. My legs felt like lead as Nurse Jensen led me down the sterile corridor toward Elena's room. The walls, painted hospital white, reflected the harsh fluorescent lights overhead, and each echo of our footsteps seemed to reverberate in time with my frenzied heartbeat. I clutched the photograph in one hand and the fraying strap of Elena's backpack in the other, as though holding both life and death in a single grasp. At the door marked Intensive Care Unit, Authorized Personnel Only, Nurse Jensen swiped her badge, the lock clicking open with mechanical precision. She motioned me inside and then paused, her expression a mixture of concern and bewilderment. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured, nodding toward the photo in my palm. I barely registered her words. The sight of Elena's room consumed me. The bed was surrounded by monitors displaying her vital signs in staccato green blips. Heart rate steady at 78, oxygen saturation 99%. Soft beeps and the hiss of an adjacent ventilator formed a mournful melody. Elena lay motionless, tubes snaking from her arms and nose, her pallid face framed by strands of dark hair stuck to her temples. Even unconscious, she was achingly beautiful, like marble carved in the image of my sister's quiet grace. A tall figure in a crisp white coat stood beside the bed, scribbling notes on a clipboard. My throat constricted as I approached. "Dr. Patel?" I asked, voice trembling. His head lifted, and I saw tired eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He gave me a polite nod. "Yes, you must be Nina's brother," he said, his accent soft but precise. "I'm her attending physician." I swallowed against the lump in my throat. I found this photo among her things," I said, offering it to him. He hesitated, then took it with gloved hands, studying it under the harsh light. His brow furrowed. "This is unusual," he whispered, more to himself than to me. He traced the date printed in white along the bottom, October 14th, 2025. "It's tomorrow," I said, my voice cracking. "How could it be?" Dr. Patel's eyes flicked from the photograph back to its silver frame, then back to me. I realized in that moment how absurd I must sound. A time-stamped photograph from the future. And yet, each breath I'd drawn since that stained-glass chapel felt propelled by its impossible promise. "I don't know," he admitted, placing the photograph on a nearby tray. "But let's focus on facts. Your sister's condition is critical, but stable. We've managed to remove most of the debris and bone fragments from her pelvis and right leg. Her head trauma is serious, but not unsurvivable." I nodded, though my world had telescoped down to that photo and what it meant. "Will she wake up?" I choked out. He exchanged a look with a nurse who hovered by the door. "It's hard to say. She's received substantial sedation to control intracranial pressure. We won't know until we slowly reduce it." The nurse slipped out, leaving us alone. I leaned closer, saw the faint rise and fall of Elena's chest. "Please," I murmured, "tell me she's going to be okay." Dr. Patel's glance softened. "She's a fighter, but I don't want to give you false hope." He paused, studying me. "Do you have family here?" "My parents are still at the chapel," I said. I needed to see her." He nodded. "You should rest too. You're in shock. Emotional trauma can be as dangerous as physical. We'll call you with any changes." I swallowed, pain twisting my gut. "Thank you, doctor." As he walked away, I felt the full weight of exhaustion crash over me. I slid into the empty chair by Elena's bedside, the photograph spread open on my lap. My eyes burned as I stared at her future self, alive, smiling, vibrant, while the present held her locked in silence. The minutes crawled by. My mind spiraled through every possibility. Could time be slipping backwards? Was someone playing a cruel trick? Or was this photo proof of something miraculous, proof that she would survive no matter what the numbers said? I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Elena's forehead. Her skin was cool beneath my fingertips. I closed my eyes, willing myself to believe in that photograph, believe in tomorrow. A soft knock at the door startled me. Nurse Jensen slipped inside, her face gentle. "Your parents are here." she said quietly. "They've been praying in the waiting room." I nodded, folding the photo carefully and slipping it back into the backpack. As I rose to go, I paused at the threshold and looked back at Elena. The steady hum of machinery, the soft hiss of air, the flutter of breathing, it all felt like a promise suspended. I stepped back into the corridor where my parents stood together, faces pale but determined. In that moment, I understood that what lay ahead was not just the battle to save Elena's life, but the journey to unravel the enigma of a photograph from the future, a puzzle that might just rewrite everything I thought I knew about fate and faith. That night, sleep eluded me. The hollowness of the hospital room corridors lingered like a bad dream, and every distant footstep set my heart racing. I returned to Elena's bedside after a brief visit with our parents in the waiting room, clutching a cup of tepid coffee that did little to warm my soul. The photograph lay on the bedside table, its edges peeking out from beneath a folded hospital gown. I sat beside her again, tracing the glossy smile that seemed to shimmer with sunlight. How had it come into existence? Tomorrow's date was etched too clearly. October 14th, 2025. No prankster's scrawl or smudged ink. This was a genuine print. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal rail of her bed and closed my eyes, willing some thread of logic to unravel the mystery. A soft rustle in the hallway drew my attention. At first, I thought it was Nurse Jensen making her rounds again, but the sound halted outside Elena's door. I lifted my head. The door cracked open, and a tall figure emerged. Father Miguel, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent light. He paused in the hall, eyes flicking to Elena's sleeping form. "Father," I whispered, both relief and confusion flooding me. "What are you doing here?" He crossed the threshold without answering, his steps slowing as he approached the bedside. In his hands, he held a small wooden box carved with delicate crosses and vines, the kind of small reliquary you'd find in an old European chapel. "I came as soon as I could," he said softly, placing the box on the table beside the photograph. "Your family asked me to pray for her late into the night," he cleared his throat, "but I felt compelled to bring this." My gaze shifted between the reliquary and the photo. "What is it?" He opened the box to reveal a single pale blue rosary, each bead intricately linked, ending in a tiny silver crucifix. It was Elena's favorite, something I remembered she always wore tucked into her pocket, rubbing the beads when she felt anxious. "She was clutching it when they found her," Father Miguel explained, voice hushed. "Among the wreckage, amid shattered glass and twisted metal, I prayed for a sign." He paused, looking down at the beads. "And now, I see it." I felt a chill. "A sign? What do you mean?" He lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time I noticed how tired he looked. Lines etched deep around his eyes, as if he'd carried the weight of too many prayers. "Faith," he said simply. "Faith does not always follow the path we expect. Sometimes it leads us through dark valleys so that wonder can find us on the other side." I nodded, uncertainty swirling in my chest. "But this photograph," Father Miguel's gaze drifted to the image. He reached out as if wanting to touch her future self through the glossy surface. "Time is not a strict line," he murmured. "It is a tapestry. Moments can overlap." I swallowed hard. The words felt heretical, yet comforting. "Do you truly believe she will wake?" He laid a hand on my shoulder. "I believe there is more to this world than meets the eye. I believe your sister's story is not finished." A sudden beeping cut through the stillness, the heart monitor's cadence shifting. Elena's chest rose more rapidly, the oxygen saturation alarm flickered. I sat bolt upright, adrenaline surging. "Doctor!" I shouted. Father Miguel leapt to his feet and crossed to the nurse's station, calling for help. Within seconds, Dr. Patel burst in, flanked by two nurses. They rushed to Elena's side, checking lines, adjusting oxygen flow, and administering medications. I was shoved gently back into the chair as they worked. Time blurred. I watched the professionals fight for her life, hands moving in rehearsed choreography, voices clipped with urgency. Then, as suddenly as it began, the alarms quieted. Dr. Patel exhaled, relief evident in his shoulders. "She's stabilizing," he announced. "The sudden drop in blood pressure was due to a small bleed in her brain, but we've managed to control it. She should remain stable for now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and leaned my head against the chair back. Father Miguel returned, his face pale but composed. He knelt beside the bed and began to pray in a low, rhythmic murmur, the rosary beads slipping through his fingers like a gentle chant. I closed my eyes, listening to the whispered Latin, the sterile scent of the room giving way to the warmth of hope. The photograph, the rosary, the priest's faith, they all wove together into something I couldn't yet name. As dawn approached, the first pale light crept through the blinds. Elena remained asleep, her life hanging between past and future. And I, seated by her side, clutched the photograph and the rosary, ready to unravel the tapestry of time, one thread at a time. The morning light seeped through the blinds, painting thin slats of gold across the pale blue walls of Elena's ICU room. I sat rigid in the chair, the rosary still coiled in my lap, and stared at the photograph once more. Each time I looked, new questions surfaced. Who had taken this picture? Why was the date stamped October 14th, 2025? And most urgent of all, how could it exist at all? Father Miguel's prayer had carried me through the night, but now I needed answers that transcended faith alone. I rose and approached the bedside table, gently picking up Elena's Nikon backpack. The compartment where the photograph had slipped in remained slightly ajar, a silent invitation to investigate further. I retrieved the small journal she always kept, its leather cover scuffed and worn from years of use. Flipping through the pages, I found entries in her precise, looping handwriting. Flight schedules, cabin assignments, notes on passengers she befriended. At the very end of the last entry was an uncharacteristic blank page, its edges spattered with coffee stains. No mention of where she had been on October 14th, only that her next duty flight was scheduled in 2 days. A knock sounded at the door. Nurse Jensen peeked in. "Dr. Patel would like you to rest," she said gently, "but I understand you've had little sleep." "I appreciate it," I replied, sliding the journal into the backpack and replacing the photograph on the bedside table. "I do need to talk to someone about this picture." She hesitated, concern in her eyes. "The hospital can't—" "I know medical privacy," I interrupted softly. "But she wouldn't have printed this photo herself. It must have been developed somewhere." Nurse Jensen bit her lip. "Okay. If you want to speak with the airline's ground crew, maybe baggage handlers or lost and found, they keep logs of items found in wreckage. You could call the central office in Chicago." My pulse quickened. "Chicago O'Hare?" She nodded. "Yes, Flight 927 originated there. They catalog everything they recover." I felt hope flare. "Thank you." After breakfast in the waiting room, I dialed the general number for Midwestern Airways headquarters. A receptionist transferred me to Lost and Found Operations. The line clicked twice, then a gravelly voice answered, "Midwestern Baggage Control. How may I direct your call?" "Hello," I said, striving for calm. "My name is Nina Hartman. I'm calling about my sister's backpack from Flight 927. I understand there's a log of recovered items. The baggage controller, a man named Alvarez, asked for flight details and my sister's name. I provided them, then braced myself as he processed the request. "Let me check," he said after a few moments. "Yes, I see a listing. One pastel green Nikon backpack, recovered by first responders in Cedar Falls, Iowa, logged October 12th. Contents itemized in our report. I can email you the manifest." "Thank you," I said. "Can you tell me who developed the photographs listed?" He hesitated. "We don't detail that here, but I see one entry. Loose prints, 4/6, date printed 10/14/2025. My breath caught. "That's my sister's photo. Who printed them?" There's a code, DCHR2047. That's our vendor ID. We send prints to Digital Charms Photo Labs in downtown Chicago. I scribbled furiously. Can you give me their contact info? Sure. 312-555-0192. Thank you, I said, hands shaking. By noon, I was back in the car with my father, speeding toward Chicago. He sat in silence, eyes fixed on the road, but I could sense his worry, his love, his desperate need for this to be just a mistake. Digital Charms was housed in an unremarkable brick building near the Merchandise Mart. The lobby smelled of fixer chemicals and plastic trays. I introduced myself to the receptionist, explained the situation, and she ushered me into the manager's office. A young woman named Marisol greeted me with cautious professionalism. "I'm truly sorry about your sister," Marisol began, "but we have strict records." She tapped a keyboard. "Here we go. On October 13th, a tech named Roman processed a batch for lost and found. Code DCHR2047 corresponds to that. The prints were developed from digital files he found on the memory card." "Memory card?" I echoed, my heart thumping. Marisol nodded. "Yes. The backpack contained her camera and an SD card labeled N. Hartman, October. We automatically processed all images on the card for the airline, hence the prints. But check, these files have timestamps." She swiveled her screen around. Rows of image thumbnails appeared, each with metadata. My fingers trembled as I read the capture times: 2025 10 to 12, 11:47:22, 2025 10 to 12, 14:03:08, and then one marked 2025 10 to 14:08, 15:42. I bit my lip. That doesn't make sense. She couldn't have taken that at 8:15 this morning. Marisol's brow furrowed. "No, she was in a coma. I can't explain why the camera's internal clock registered that time." I closed my eyes, struggling to steady my breath. Did Roman see anything odd? He mentioned the last image file wouldn't import properly. He had to recover it manually. Then he printed it. She swallowed. "But he swears he hasn't touched the camera since. It's back in your sister's backpack." I nodded, collecting the photograph from her outstretched hand. The image felt heavier now, laden with proof, an impossible timestamp censored into the very file structure. Back in the car, I tucked the picture into my journal. My father glanced at me. "What did you learn?" "That this isn't just a print shop glitch," I said quietly. "The photo file itself has a future timestamp." He exhaled slowly, eyes misting. "Nina, this sounds like madness." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Maybe, but if there's even a chance Elena survives because time bends around her, I have to follow it wherever it leads." Outside, the sun dipped low, igniting the Chicago skyline. And in my hand, the photograph pulsed with potential, an invitation to chase tomorrow's light. The drive back to Cedar Falls was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic ticking of the dashboard clock. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set in grim determination. Beside him, I stared down at the photograph tucked inside my journal, Elena's impossible smile frozen in a moment that had yet to arrive. The world felt unmoored, as though we were careening along the seams of reality itself. When we reached the small-town hospital where the crash victims were triaged, the sun had already slipped behind the low, rolling hills. I followed my father through the sliding glass doors, the scent of antiseptic and fresh linen greeting us. Nurse Jensen, still on duty, met us halfway down the corridor with a sympathetic nod. She led us to a quiet conference room just off the nurses' station. "I've arranged for you to speak with Detective Ramirez," she said softly. "He's investigating the accident report and might have insights." My pulse picked up. A detective, someone used to evidence, timelines, and forensic facts, could either confirm the absurdity of the photograph or perhaps shine a light on the crack through which time itself had slipped. Detective Ramirez entered moments later, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He nodded to Nurse Jensen before turning to us. "Ms. Hartman," he began, voice low but firm, I understand you have some questions outside the usual scope. I took a breath and placed the photo on the table between us. Ramirez picked it up carefully, examining the glossy surface under the harsh fluorescent light. "You're saying this was recovered from the crash site?" he asked. I nodded. "And developed by a reputable lab, with metadata stamped 2 days in the future." He frowned, turning the image over. "Not many people in this world take claims like that seriously," he said quietly. "But I can't dismiss it out of hand if you bring evidence." I felt a flicker of hope. "I've spoken with the lab manager in Chicago. They showed me the camera's SD card metadata, a file time-stamped October 14th at 8:15 a.m. They said the file was corrupted and required manual recovery, but it was genuine." Ramirez set the photograph aside and leaned back in his chair. "I'll request the full digital forensics report from Digital Charms, and I'll have my team analyze the crash site catalog. If there's any sign of tampering or if additional prints were found, we'll know." My father exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Detective." Ramirez inclined his head. "In the meantime, I'd suggest you keep us informed of any other anomalies. And please try to get some rest. Both of you look exhausted." We left the hospital under a sky mottled with bruised clouds, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I slipped the photograph back into my journal and folded the rosary into my pocket. As we reached our car, I realized how deeply I'd come to rely on these physical tokens, the printed image, the beads, as anchors in a world gone awry. That evening, back in my parents' home, I spread the contents of Elena's backpack across the dining room table. Her Nikon camera, the SD card, travel journals, a half-finished paperback, and the single Polaroid prints. I booted up my laptop and inserted the SD card, loading the recovered files into a metadata viewer. There it was again, the phantom timestamp, precise to the second. I exported the log as a text file, printed it, and placed it beside the photo on the table. My father watched from the doorway. "What's next?" he asked, voice heavy with fatigue. I tapped the metadata report. "We find out who took that photo and when." The next morning, I called Roman, the lab technician who had handled Elena's files. He agreed to meet me at a nearby cafe, his face pale, eyes rimmed with shadows of sleepless nights. "I swear, I never touched the dates," he told me, stirring his coffee nervously. "When I recovered the corrupted file, I used our standard photo repair software. It extracts header info directly from the file, then rebuilds damaged blocks. The timestamp came from the file's own metadata, not from my system clock." I leaned forward. "So where did the metadata come from?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Your sister's camera writes file info based on its internal clock. If the battery dies, or if the clock resets, it could default to an incorrect date. But 2 days ahead. That's unprecedented." My mind raced. Could the crash have jolted her camera's circuitry, somehow syncing it to a future time? Or was something else at play? Something beyond the laws of electronics? Roman glanced nervously at his watch. "I'm sorry I can't offer more, but if it helps, I saved a raw dump of the file sectors before recovery. You could have a forensic specialist examine it directly." I nodded, slipping Roman's card into my pocket. Outside, the sky wept a gentle rain, each drop tapping against the pavement like a heartbeat. Inside, my resolve hardened. Somewhere between Cedar Falls and tomorrow, I would uncover the thread that bound Elena's fate to this photograph. And no matter how impossible it seemed, I would pull on that thread until the tapestry of time unraveled or revealed its secrets. The dawn of October 13th broke in a haze of mist, the pale sun struggling to pierce the low-hanging clouds over Cedar Falls. I slipped out of bed before my parents awoke, careful not to wake them. In the stillness of their bedroom, I gathered Elena's Nikon, the SD card, and the printed metadata report, tucking everything into a worn messenger bag. I needed to see the camera itself. Its innards might hold the key to this mystery. By 7:30 a.m., I was at the hospital, the corridors eerily empty. Nurse Jensen recognized me immediately. "You're back early," she said softly, concern flickering in her eyes. "I need to see the camera." She led me to a small storage room where Elena's personal belongings were kept. On a low shelf sat the green Nikon backpack next to a cardboard box labeled with her name. I lifted the backpack with trembling hands, unzipped the main compartment, and withdrew the camera. Its metal body was scratched and scorched in places, the lens cap missing. I cradled it gently, as though it were both a relic and a ticking bomb. "Be careful with that," Nurse Jensen warned. "I'll get a witness if you need one." I nodded, closing the door behind me. In the corner, a folding chair waited. I sat and gingerly slipped the SD card from its slot. The camera's battery compartment was empty, likely ejected during the crash. I rested the camera beside me and held the card up to the morning light, curious whether I could see any physical distortion. The card looked normal. Green plastic casing, a tiny gold connector edge. I swallowed and powered on my phone's portable reader, sliding the card in. As the files loaded, the familiar series of JPEG thumbnails appeared, each with its timestamp. My jaw clenched as I scrolled to the last image. October 14th, 2025, 8:15:42. I tapped the file properties and exported the raw XIF header to a text file, then opened it in a hex viewer. Lines of code filled the screen. Hex addresses, binary data, segments labeled date, time, original, and modify date. Below, the date string glowed in ASCII 2025, 10/14/08/15:42. No typo, no anomaly. A noise behind me startled me. It was Dr. Patel, rounding the corridor. He paused by the door. "Nina?" I closed the laptop, heart hammering. "I'm just confirming something." He stepped inside, face lined with fatigue. "Your sister's camera?" I held up the Nikon. "I need to know if the device itself could be tampered with, or if this is truly coming from the camera's own clock." He nodded, understanding. "I can arrange for our biomedical engineer friend, Helen Cho, to run diagnostics. She has experience with sensitive electronics." Hope surged. "Thank you." Dr. Patel lingered. "Be careful, Nina. Your search is noble, but don't let it consume you." I gave him a small smile, though I felt hollow. "I won't." Helen Cho arrived that afternoon, her petite frame belying the force of her intellect. She unpacked the Nikon on a stainless steel cart, her gloved fingers deftly opening the battery compartment and sealing it from contamination. "The crash impact could have jolted the internal clock chip," she told me, her voice precise. "But we'd expect the clock to reset to 2000.0101 or to zero out entirely. A leap 2 days into the future suggests either a firmware anomaly or an external overwrite." "External overwrite," I echoed. She gave me a wry look. "Tampering by someone who knows how to reprogram the firmware, but that's complex and unlikely to happen mid-flight." She connected the camera to her diagnostic console. Lines of code scrolled on her laptop as she accessed the camera's firmware logs. "Here!" She pointed to a timestamp deeper in the system. "Booted at 2025, 10/12/9/03.17. Immediately after impact logs register an abrupt power interruption." Impact logs? Most cameras record a sudden voltage drop or battery displacement. According to these logs, the power was fully cut for exactly 3.46 seconds, then restored. She looked up. A reboot could trigger the internal clock to glitch. If the clock registers a wrong rollover, it might wrap to an incorrect date. But again, 2 days forward is outside any expected clock cycle. My mind raced. Is there any way the camera's clock syncs to an external signal, like GPS? Helen tapped a few keys. "This model, no GPS. It uses a basic quartz oscillator, nothing networked." She sighed. "I'm not seeing a hardware explanation." I felt the weight of despair pressing in. "Then it's impossible." Helen paused, studying me. "Sometimes circuits fail in unpredictable ways. But beyond that, I can't rationalize it." The next question hit me like a physical blow. Could this anomaly transfer from the camera to the SD card metadata directly, or would it only affect the file header? She hesitated. Directly to the header. The card logs whatever the camera tells it, so if the camera's internal time was wrong at capture, the metadata would reflect that. I exhaled slowly, glancing at the camera. So the camera itself is the source of the future timestamp. Helen packed up her tools. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer. She stood, folding her arms. But I will send you the full diagnostic report. Left alone with the camera, the SD card, and the photocopied metadata, I felt time itself pressing against me, an invisible wall ticking forward, relentless and indifferent. Yet, within that barrier, my sister's life hung in the balance. That evening I returned to Elena's bedside with Helen's report and the camera. Father Miguel was there, holding vigil with the rosary. He looked up as I entered, weary but serene. I've spoken with experts, I began. There's no logical explanation for the timestamp, only that it originated in the camera itself. He nodded, placing the rosary in my hand. Then let faith fill the spaces where reason falls short. I gazed at his outstretched palm, the smooth beads warm against my skin. In that moment, I understood. This journey was not only about unraveling a temporal mystery, but reconciling the fractures between belief and evidence. I closed my eyes, pressing the rosary to my heart. Tomorrow awaited, wrapped in question marks. But for the first time since the crash, I felt something like certainty that whatever the camera had told us, Elena's story was destined to continue. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the ICU blinds, casting long, restless shadows across the pale blue walls. I arrived before sunrise, clutching Helen's diagnostic report in one hand and the Nikon camera in the other. The corridor was silent, save for the distant hum of ventilation and the soft click of my shoes on the linoleum floor. I paused outside Elena's room, gathering my courage. Today, I would confront the one person who might hold the key to this mystery beyond science and faith combined. Inside, Father Miguel knelt beside Elena's bed, his lips moving in silent prayer. The tiny crucifix at his chest glinted where a sliver of dawn struck it. I watched him for a long moment before clearing my throat. He looked up, eyes warm but weary, and offered me a small, compassionate smile. "Good morning," he said softly. I settled into the chair by Elena's bedside, laying the camera and report on the table. "I spoke with the engineers," I began, voice thick with fatigue. "There's no technical explanation for the timestamp. Nothing in the hardware, firmware, or circuitry. The camera rebooted during the crash, and the internal clock glitched 2 days ahead, but even that doesn't account for the leap to October 14th. Father Miguel nodded, folding his hands. "And yet," he said, "the photograph remains." I swallowed, staring at the glossy print pinned beneath his crucifix. "I need you to tell me how you see this. You said time is a tapestry, not a line. I need to understand what that might mean." He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the hospital's empty courtyard. A pair of sparrows flitted among the bare branches of a small oak, brittle silhouettes against the pale sky. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass. "Time," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "is woven from moments of significance, threads of joy, sorrow, hope, and despair. We perceive it linearly because our lives are bound by birth and death, but God's tapestry encompasses all at once, past, present, future interlaced." I clenched the arms of the chair. "So you believe this photograph is proof of that tapestry's weave?" He turned, eyes grave. "I believe it is a sign, a whisper from beyond our mortal boundaries, a promise that the future can be altered, that prayers are heard outside the constraints of minutes and hours." A sudden chime from the monitor broke the stillness. Elena's heart rate climbed to 98, and the oxygen saturation dipped. I leapt to my feet as Nurse Jensen burst in, followed by Dr. Patel, wheeling in a portable ultrasound. They worked without a word, adjusting medication, injecting fluids, carefully guiding probes across Elena's temple. Father Miguel laid the rosary gently across the bedside table and stepped back, his prayers shifting to silent watchfulness. I hovered at the edge of the bed, fingers twitching with helplessness. After several anxious minutes, the monitor settled. Elena's vitals returned to a steady rhythm. Heart rate 76, saturation 98%. Dr. Patel exhaled, then offered me a nod. She's responding well to the new protocol. We've adjusted her intracranial pressure meds. If she stabilizes overnight, we'll begin to taper sedation tomorrow. My chest loosened with relief. Thank you, I whispered. Once the physicians departed, I turned back to Father Miguel, who retrieved the photograph and held it between us. This image, he said, was captured from the future, but it belongs to our present choices. Your sister's survival hinges not on inevitability, but on the faith we act upon now. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the photo. I've done everything science and faith could guide me to do. I called Chicago. I spoke with a forensics lab technician. I examined the camera. I prayed. He nodded slowly. And yet, your journey is not over. I looked into his eyes, searching for direction. What else can I do? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. When he opened them, they sparkled with a quiet certainty. There is one more place you must go. My heart skipped. Where? He reached into his robe pocket and withdrew a small, faded envelope sealed with dark wax. The seal bore the crest of St. Mary's Memorial Chapel, the place where he first told us it was time to let Elena go. This arrived for me this morning, he said, handing the envelope to me. No sender, no return address, only your name, painstakingly written. I turned the envelope over in my hands. My breath caught as I saw my own handwriting, neat, familiar cursive, scrawled across the front. But I had never written this. He watched me intently. Open it. Fingers trembling, I broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. My eyes widened as I read the single line in my own handwriting. Meet me at O'Hare, Gate C22. October 14th, 07:30 a.m. My world tilted. Gate C22, tomorrow morning, at O'Hare. The exact location in the photograph. I looked up at Father Miguel, voice barely a whisper. It's an invitation from the future. He nodded. Go, and trust the path time has laid before you. My heart thundered in my chest. Outside, the ICU hallway lay silent. Between those walls, time trembled on the cusp of revelation. And in my hand, the letter pulsed like a heartbeat. A summons to confront tomorrow's promise before it became yesterday's memory. I stepped out of the hospital into the crisp October morning, the sky still tinged with violet, where dawn had not yet broken. My breath formed ghostly puffs in the air as I walked to the car, the faded envelope burning in the pocket of my coat. Gate C22 at O'Hare. An impossible summons, yet I could feel its gravity pulling me forward, toward answers, toward tomorrow. My father met me at the hospital entrance, worry shadowing his face. You can't go, he began, but I held up a hand. I have to, I said, voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. I need to know who sent this. He glanced at the envelope, his eyes wet. Be careful, he whispered, and call me. I nodded, then climbed into the rental car I'd reserved the night before. The heater struggled against the chill as I typed O'Hare International Airport into the GPS. The display showed 175 miles, roughly 3 hours drive. I glanced at my watch. It was 4:45 a.m. If I pushed myself, I could reach Gate C22 well before 7:30. The highway was nearly deserted. Mile markers slid past in a blur of silver-white in the car's headlights. My mind raced through every possibility. What if the letter was a prank, a cruel joke? But the handwriting, the envelope, they had felt too real. And the photograph, the SD card metadata, the engineer's report, all pointed to the same truth. Time itself was fractured around Elena's fate. As sunrise began to tinge the horizon with rose and gold, the Chicago skyline emerged, battered by low clouds. I exited the tollway, weaving through the airport service roads until I reached the long-term economy lot. A shuttle bus whisked me past silent terminals and cargo bays, dropping me at the North Terminal just after 7 a.m. Inside, the hum of early morning travelers and airport staff filled the cavernous hall. I consulted the departure boards. All flights to domestic destinations listed by gate. I followed the signs toward Concourse C and then Gate C22. At every turn, my heart thundered. Was I late? Would the mystery vanish? I arrived at the gate at 7:18 a.m. and paused a few yards away. The seating area was empty, except for a lone figure standing beside the jet bridge door, backlit by the pale light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wore a dark overcoat and carried a small messenger bag slung across his shoulder. His posture was calm, shoulders squared, as though he'd been waiting for hours. I walked forward, each step measured, until I stood within arm's length. The man turned, and for a moment I thought I saw my own features reflected in his face. Same dark hair falling in waves, same hazel eyes that trembled when I was frightened, same set to the jaw that held determination. "Hello, Nina," he said, voice disconcertingly gentle. My breath caught. "Who are you?" He smiled softly. "I'm you, just a few days from now." A gust of wind rattled the terminal windows, carrying the distant roar of a departing jet. My heart seized. "This isn't possible." He nodded. "I know how it looks. You don't have long before your invitation expires." He lifted his messenger bag and unzipped it, pulling out a fresh photograph. "This is for you." I held out my hand, and he placed the print in my palm. My fingers curled around it as though it were a lifeline. I unfolded it. There was Elena stepping off a medical transport at St. Mary's Chapel, eyes open and bright, a faint smile on her lips, alive. The date printed at the bottom read, October 16th, 2025, just 2 days from now. Tears pricked my eyes. "You made it," I whispered. He glanced down at the image. "Yes, and you will too, if you return now and tell them to prepare her for the transport tomorrow morning. It's the surgery that saves her life." My mind reeled. Transport? Surgery? He pressed a finger to his lips. "I can't say more. Time won't allow it here. You have to trust me." He stepped back toward the bridge door, lifting his arm to hail someone beyond the threshold. I lunged forward. "Wait, how do I know you're really me?" He turned one last time, a gentle smile blooming. "Because you believed. You followed where reason and faith both pointed. That's who you are." A door hissed open behind him, and a nurse's silhouette appeared. The man I thought was my future self gave me a small salute. "Good luck, Nina." Then he slipped through the door and vanished. My knees trembled as I stared at the closed bridge door. The photograph burned in my hand, a promise of tomorrow's dawn. I tucked it into my journal and turned back toward the terminal exit, every fiber of my being humming with urgency. I didn't know how to get Elena from ICU to St. Mary's by tomorrow morning. I didn't know what kind of surgical team would be waiting, but I had the proof, and I had the message. Her life depended on the choices I made now. With the image of her radiant face lighting my path, I retraced my steps through the terminal and into the waiting shuttle. The journey back began at 7:42 a.m., and every mile drove me closer to the moment that would determine Elena's fate, if I could just stay one beat ahead of time itself. The long-term parking shuttle rattled to a halt at the hospital's main entrance just after 10 a.m. I fumbled with my phone as it buzzed incessantly in my pocket, dozens of missed calls from my father and Nurse Jensen. I'd sent a terse text. "In transit. Will call from ICU." Now the cold autumn air bit through my thin jacket as I dashed inside, pulling the rental keys from my pocket. I sprinted down the corridor toward the ICU, pausing only briefly at the nurse's station. My eyes locked on Nurse Jensen's concerned face. "She's coming," I managed between breaths, flashing the photograph from O'Hare. "Pre-op team needs to prep her tonight." Her eyes widened as she scanned the print. Elena, alert and smiling, the date reading October 16th. This is not standard protocol, she whispered, handing the photo to Dr. Patel, who'd just appeared behind her. He ran a hand through his hair, then caught my gaze. We've got 4 hours before your window closes. We can't transfer her until she's stable enough to wake, but we can start weaning sedation and readying a transport ventilator. I exhaled, relief and panic warring in my chest. Do it. Nearby, the transport team assembled. A critical care nurse, a respiratory therapist with a portable ventilator, and an orderly pushing a gurney. Dr. Patel strode over, urgency etched in every line of his face. We'll reduce her propofol drip now, he said, checking IV lines. The goal is light sedation by 8 p.m., then extubation by midnight. The ambulance leaves at 2:01 a.m. sharp. I knelt beside Elena's bed, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. Her vitals held steady, heart rate 80, saturation 97%. The photograph lay on the bedside table as a silent talisman. Hang in there, sis, I murmured. We're going to get you home. As afternoon faded into early evening, I remained glued to Elena's side, updating the transport team and praying under my breath. Every time the alarms ticked higher or the sedation pump clicked, my heart lurched. At 7:45 p.m., Dr. Patel declared her ready for sedation taper. The IV rate slowed, and over the next hour, Elena's breathing grew more natural. The respiratory therapist calibrated the portable ventilator, confirming that it would fit under the ambulance stretcher. By 11:50 p.m., the ICU hallway lights were dimmed as part of night protocol. Nurse Jensen shone a small flashlight on Elena's face, searching for blink responses. The room held its breath. Try her name, Dr. Patel whispered. Elena, can you hear us? A single eyelid fluttered. Then both eyes opened, clouded but lucid, as though she were surfacing from a long dive. I pressed my hand to hers. Elena, I choked out, tears rushing to my eyes, her lips parted in a ghost of a smile. Nina? My heart surged. Yes, it's me. We're moving you in 2 hours to St. Mary's. She blinked slowly, then nodded, comprehension dawning in her eyes. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, I confirmed. October 14th. She closed her eyes again, breathing steadily. The transport team finished securing her lines and Test ran the ventilator. At exactly 2 a.m., the gurney reached her door, the team moving with hushed precision. I walked alongside, the photograph of her stepping off the transport van tucked inside my jacket. Outside, the ambulance idled under the pale glow of the street lamps. I climbed into the back, taking position by Elena's head. The city was still, the night air cold and expectant. As the doors closed, I checked Elena's eyes. Steady, trusting. The engine revved, and we pulled away from the hospital, headlights carving a path through the dark. Behind us, the city lights bobbed like distant lanterns. In the front seat, the critical care nurse adjusted monitors. At my side, Elena's hand twitched in mine. I opened my journal and slid the new photograph onto the tray table. Her alive and radiant, just 2 days hence. My pen hovered over the next chapter space. We would reach St. Mary's in under 30 minutes. The surgical team would be ready. And in the tapestry of time, at the very thread where past, present, and future wove together, Elena's future was no longer a question. It was a promise. The ambulance's tires whispered against the pavement as we pulled into the drive of St. Mary's Memorial Chapel at 2:27 a.m. The night air was cool and still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Through the vehicle's rear doors, I saw the chapel's stained glass windows glowing faintly, casting jewel-toned mosaics onto the gravel path. My heart pounded. This was the moment the photograph had foretold, but the real weight of it pressed on me now. Inside, the surgical team waited under bright operating room lights. Dr. Patel led them, scrub cap tilted slightly back, face resolute. A row of nurses and technicians stood ready, monitoring lines of IV fluid, sterile trays stacked like sentinels. In the center lay a gurney where Elena's pale form rested, eyes closed, chest rising with each mechanical breath. I stood at the foot of the bed, envelope and final photograph clutched in one hand, rosary beads coiled in the other. The latest image, Elena smiling and stepping off the transport van on October 16th, was now a map pointing toward this night's choices. Surgical prep nurses worked swiftly, shaving and disinfecting, while anesthesiologists double-checked doses. Dr. Patel approached me, whispering, "We're on schedule. We begin incision at 3 a.m. The specialized neurosurgical team is here. They'll relieve the remaining hematoma and stabilize the intracranial pressure. Prognosis is excellent." I nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you for believing, for acting." He gave a small, tired smile. "Your belief brought her here." The team moved Elena onto the operating table. I stepped aside, watching gloved hands secure her head in the Mayfield clamp with precision. The rhythmic beeps of monitors formed a low heartbeat beneath the surgeon's soft commands. One nurse covered Elena's face with a drape, leaving only the exact spot for the incision, a small, curved line drawn above her right temple. At 3 a.m. sharp, the lead surgeon, Dr. Camille Reyes, picked up the scalpel. Her calm voice broke the silence. "Here we go." She made the first incision, slow and deliberate. The OR lights gleamed off the steel instruments. I sank into a chair just outside the sterile field, clutching my rosary so tightly I could feel each bead's smooth coolness. Time stretched. I watched the team's choreography, retractors opening like mechanical flowers, suction clearing blood, microscopic drills whispering at bone. I closed my eyes, fingers slipping over the rosary beads, praying for each step: incision, exposure, evacuation, closure. The photograph lay open on a nearby stand. Her future self, smiling, vibrant, waiting. At 3:45 a.m., a sudden shift. The surgeons paused, leaning closer. One of them held up a small tissue sample for pathology, then returned to the work. Minutes later, Rhea's voice rang clear. "Evacuation complete. No unexpected complications. Lowering ICP now." Monitors flickered as intracranial pressure readings dropped from 22 mmHg to a safe 12 mmHg. A collective exhale filled the room. Instruments were withdrawn, the skull flap replaced and secured. Sutures closed the incision, and a sterile dressing covered the site. The anesthesiologist eased Elena's sedation, and her breathing evened out. At 4:15 a.m., the team rolled her out on the gurney toward recovery. I followed behind, heart fluttering. In the recovery room, Elena's eyes fluttered open, confusion flickering before recognition. I leaned in, voice trembling. "You're safe. You're home now." She reached up, touching the bandage on her temple, then my hand. Her lips curved into a genuine smile, the first in what felt like an eternity. Tears fell unbidden. "You made it," I whispered, pressing the photograph into her hand. She traced the image with her finger, her future self, healthy and whole. Later that morning, as the sun rose over St. Mary's, the chapel bells tolled softly. Father Miguel emerged from the chapel doors, rosary in hand, eyes shining. He stepped into the recovery room, greeting Elena with a blessing and me with a nod of solemn joy. We gathered in a small side chapel, sunlight filtering through the stained glass, turning dust motes into golden fireflies. Elena, draped in a warm blanket, held her camera, intact, its SD card now a relic of a journey beyond reason. I placed the final photograph on the altar alongside the rosary and the aged letter, symbols of faith, love, and the thin veil between time's moments. Father Miguel spoke quietly. "God's tapestry is vast. Tonight our prayers and actions wove a new thread. Let this be a story of hope, proof that faith and courage can reach across time itself." Elena opened her eyes, strong and steady, meeting my gaze. "Thank you," she whispered to me, then to the empty space beyond, where past, present, and future converged. As we exited the chapel into the bright morning, I tucked the rosary into my pocket and lifted my camera. Outside, The world awaited, each moment an unwritten frame. I raised the Nikon and clicked, capturing the dawn of our new story.